Montenegro is a small but very beautiful highland country on the Adriatic coast. Picturesque landscapes, beaches, mountains, tasty food, hospitable people, all that is needed for good vacations and quiet life. Economy depends upon tourism and real estate, with over half of visitors and investors being from Russia. Montenegro is an Orthodox Christian country with the culture and language similar to that of Russia. But because of the aggravated geopolitical confrontation, Montenegro found itself in a very difficult situation. In the end of 2015, Montenegrins are forced to decide to be with NATO or with Russia. Milo Djukanovic's government pushes for the accelerated liberalization of the country that causes the growing resistance of the overwhelming majority of the population. Recently, Montenegro has imposed sanctions against Russia and voted for recognition of Kosovo as an independent member state of UNESCO. Given the latest progress of the Russian military operation in Syria and some stabilization in Ukraine, Western strategists are rushing to lock Montenegro for themselves as soon as possible. It would forever cut off Serbia from an access to the sea and would encircle this potential Russian ally in the Balkans with a hostile ring of pro-NATO satellites. And although there is now a pro-Western regime in Serbia acting against the will of most Serbs, this situation may change. And therefore stakes are now higher than ever. Since the end of September 2015, Montenegro is shaken by numerous protests which are being cruelly suppressed by the police. Thousands of Montenegrins have gathered here today. You see, people are protesting. Exactly a week ago, a similar demonstration has been violently dispersed by the police. After that, the number of participants have sharply increased. People are in a very resolute mood. Montenegro haven't seen anything like that probably in the last 10 or 20 years. Growing opposition demands resignation of the Prime Minister Djukanovic, whom they call a dictator who regularly falsifies election results.
Noća slobode u Crnoj Gori pobjeđujem! Bacite tu sramnu Đukanovićevu opremu!
Milo Djukanovic is in power already for a long 25 years and controls considerable part of the national economy. He began his career in the Communist Party of Yugoslavia, then was engaged in smuggling of cigarettes and other doubtful affairs in the rough 90s. There are reasons to believe that the West so tightly controls Djukanovic because of a large number of compromising evidence about him. As a result, we observe a classical example of an oppressive regime which is crushing by force any opposition with the full support of the Western mass media and politicians. It was the case with Saakashvili, Poroshenko and many others. So where are real democracy and human rights? One of the opposition leaders, Gojko Rajcevic, was beaten by the police several times. He heads the movement not in NATO. For 25 years, we're victims of the irresponsible regime which only at the beginning supported Serbians and Russians. The fact that Montenegrin regime actively participated in organized crime, illegal trade of cigarettes, weapons and other shadow dealings, gave to Washington a chance to blackmail Milo Djukanovic, to play on the American side or go to jail. That is why Djukanovic and his regime for a short period of time have been pro-Serbian and pro-Russian. Then it became anti-Serbian but remained pro-Russian, and now it became also anti-Russian. Today, Montenegro has imposed sanctions against Russia. I think that this news didn't even reach Russia because sanctions of such country as Montenegro are neither noticeable nor important for Russia. But it is one of the most shameful decisions of the Montenegrin regime. It stands in one line with the recent vote on Montenegro to recognize Kosovo as a member state of UNESCO and with the decision to leave the United States with Serbia. Here is an opinion of the leader of the opposition party New Serbian Democracy and the member of parliament Andrija Mandić. The situation in Montenegro is such that the authorities have never changed after elections for one simple reason. Results of elections in Montenegro are falsified, and it is organized by the people who formed the government. This conversation was recorded on the eve of a mass protest of October 24 in the capital of Podgorica. About 20,000 people went to the streets. This is unprecedented for the small and quiet country with the population of only 620,000 people. It is the most numerous protest on the streets of Podgorica. We will try to put pressure on the dictator to force him to step down, to resign, or at least lose the coalition partners with whom he has the majority in parliament and who support his cabinet. We insist on creating a transitional government which would organize the first fair elections. The police has used force again to disperse protesters of this new protest, and the leader of the opposition, Andrija Mandić, has been arrested. We don't want to grab the power through the street violence. We want to win as a result of fair and free elections. Also, we know that we have the majority to win. During anti-government demonstration of October 24, some members of parliament and journalists were detained. The leader of the opposition and the head of the movement No to NATO, Gojko Rajčević, was once again beaten. It was last Saturday. Till this day, the protest, which began at the end of September, has lasted for 3 weeks. At first I thought that it has no big future, as was the case with previous protests. But the police last Saturday has violently dispersed protesters, a catastrophic error of the regime. They used the unnecessary force when more than 1,000 police officers dispersed about 50 peaceful protesters. They used force against Podgorica citizens, against deputies of Parliament of Montenegro, against journalists. 2 journalists and 3 deputies were arrested. 2 more deputies and some journalists, including me, were wounded. It is especially shocking that these obvious violations of human rights and open lawlessness are not noticed at all by allegedly free and objective Western press. The level of hypocrisy and double standards are outrageous. The West remained blind and deaf to the protests in Podgorica. We didn't see any word about it in the mass media of the West. Such absence of information and reaction has unpleasantly surprised us. The number of protesters is underestimated by several times by the main liberal mass media. So, according to their data, on October 24, there were only 5,000 protesters in Podgorica's city center. Our filmmaking team was in the middle of the crowd that day and can testify that there were about 15 or 20,000 people protesting against Đukanović's regime. We see that people read our news and that they watch them closely. These are very big ratings, and we simply don't believe that in the West it simply interests nobody. People have less and less trust in the mass media now. But at the same time, the Serbian Orthodox Church is the most respected institution in Montenegro. Since 1998, the voice of the Church is heard through the radio Sveti Gora. This is the first church radio of the Serbian Orthodox Church. Radio was very popular in 1999 during terrible 78 days of NATO attack on Serbia and Montenegro. The staff of our radio witnessed all events in Kosovo in 1998-99. According to the Constitution of Montenegro, all citizens have equal rights. It means that the priests have a right to express their opinion. Present protests have one more reason. Now, the new law on churches and religious communities is being drafted. Under this law, they will confiscate the church lands. It wasn't done even by the Turks and invaders during World War I. Montenegrin authorities accuse Russia of inspiring the current protest movement in Montenegro and try to present all this as the project of Moscow. It is completely untrue, and it causes reasonable indignation of Montenegrins. The regime tries to tell that the protest is imported from Serbia, that it is done by patriotic parties of Serbia or someone else, even that the protest is organized and is coordinated from Russia. I have organized many protests against NATO, and I can confirm that the present protest from the beginning to the end was created and carried out inside Montenegro. The organization which I represent expresses the opinion of more than 70% of the population of the country. When I mention 70%, I know what I'm talking about. 70% of citizens of Montenegro consider our Metropolitan Amfiloche to be the most honest person whom they unconditionally trust. 70% of citizens of Montenegro speak the same language as me, the Serbian language. 70% of citizens of Montenegro are Orthodox Christians, so this percentage is applicable when we speak about the support of anti-NATO position. From 70 to 90% of the population oppose the entry of the country into NATO. There are a lot of reasons, and first of all, that we had been the victims of the NATO bombings in the 90s, at first the Republika Srpska and later the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia. We have moral obligations to the victims of the NATO aggression, which were numerous. It is the first reason. Secondly, we understand that an ultimate goal of expansion of NATO is to capture the vast Russian natural resources. That means its ultimate goal is Russia. The last but not the least is the civilizational reason. We know what NATO really does from our own experience of Serbia and Montenegro. We see what NATO commits in the countries of the Middle East, in Iraq, in Ukraine, and in other regions of the world. It is clear that all these conflicts are the big project of NATO. It is also clear why they have created and supported for years a huge number of non-governmental organizations in the country. Their activity is very visible here, and especially it has affected our authorities, which are a peculiar type of the NATO product. Our purpose is to explain to citizens of Montenegro and Serbia all the bad consequences of the accession to NATO. One should not forget that the first victim of NATO bombings were in Montenegro, in Danilovgrad. It was the soldier Sasha Stajic who was killed on March 24th at 8:30 p.m. We can only repeat the words of the Father Herman, who now rests in the city of Jasenovac. I forgive, but I don't forget. And we will forgive, but we won't forget. Montenegro doesn't love NATO because NATO have bombed us, and these bombings costed us many lives. But Milo Djukanovic cares only to please the Western centers of power, whom he has been faithfully serving both in 1998 and in 1999. Because of that, the West turns a blind eye to his undemocratic activities, which would be unacceptable in their own countries. They don't notice mass falsifications of election results, and in exchange, Djukanovic follows all the instructions which he receives from the West. One of their top priorities now is the fast entry of Montenegro into NATO. The accession to NATO and confrontation with Russia can badly hurt the national economy. After all, economic well-being of Montenegro in many respects depends on Russia. We are very much afraid that the entry of Montenegro into NATO will cause a negative reaction of the Russian tourists and their quantity will diminish. We don't want that to happen. Thousands of small businesses can be ruined and many Montenegrins will lose their jobs. However, despite this obvious severe reality, Milo Djukanovic tries to hypnotize Montenegrins by his sweet words and promises.
Mir, multietnički sklad, stabilnost i nezavisnost Crne Gore. Članstvom u NATO savezu pojačat ćemo povjerenje međunarodne zajednice, prije svega inostranih investitora, prema Crnoj Gori i stvoriti pretpostavke za kvalitetnu valorizaciju naših razvojnih resursa. Time i za ubrzan ekonomski rast, za pouzdanu vladavinu prava i demokratski razvoj za kvalitetniji život svakog našeg građana.
Here are the examples of such propaganda that has filled the TV channels and streets of Montenegro. It tries to lure people into a false sense of security.
Partnerstvo za sigurnu budućnost. Crna Gora u NATO.
I think that the accession to NATO is an extremely dangerous decision for Montenegrin tourism. But of course, it is not the main reason why we are against NATO. We simply consider that it is a wrong place for Montenegro to be. And besides, we don't wish to be a part of the aggressive bloc, and we're against the union with those who had been killing us in 1999. Also, the accession to NATO doesn't promise anything good for our economy. 50 to 60% of our tourists are Russians. Some experts predict that after the accession to NATO, there will be less Russians but more Germans. But we love Russians, we're glad to see them. They're good guests. Everything that a person can tell about his brother, we can tell about Russians. Spiritual measurement of the current crisis is much more important. The indisputable spiritual leader of the country is the Montenegrin and literal metropolitan Amfilohi. He is one of the most respected bishops of the Serbian Orthodox Church that historically include Montenegro. Montenegro chose once and forever the holy city of Jerusalem, the first Rome and the second Rome, Constantinople, and its successor, the Moscow Kingdom, the third Rome. The Balkan people and the East Slavic people with Russia constitute the original Europe. Montenegro was born there. That is why that Temple of Resurrection in Podgorica is reviving as youth. Being a young boy, future bishop was dreaming in his child's heart to build one day in Podgorica a large temple of the resurrection. And the Lord has allowed him to become metropolitan and fulfill his dream. This is the essence of all the events in Montenegro in the last decades. This revival of morality, of faith, of original orthodoxy. The Temple of Christ's Resurrection was consecrated in 2013 after 20 years of construction. It is decorated with the beautiful frescoes, some of which bear important warnings for politicians. Here, for example, is the image of the communist leaders being tortured in hell, Tito, Marx and Engels. It is not the first time and not the last time when the leadership pursues its own interests, portraying them as the interests of the state and of the people. Montenegro has introduced sanctions against Russia. What a madness! We do not understand it. There are a group of people who have taken power and who believe that the history begins with them. But this power can be gone tomorrow. But here in Montenegro, our Orthodox Christian beliefs, spirituality, moral values have always been, are, and will forever be our guiding principles, together with other Orthodox countries led by Russia, and thanks God. It is very symbolic that the peaceful march against the accession to NATO and for Djukanovic's resignation has started from the main cathedral of Montenegro, where people have arrived by buses and cars from all over the country. At the time of the Socialist Federal Republic of Yugoslavia, the city of Podgorica had been called Titograd, after the leader of the Communist Party, Josip Broz Tito. Unfortunately, from 1946 to 1992, Podgorica had another name. It has been carrying the name of the man who has made an order to bomb it. Bombings were carried out by the British, our allies, if we can call them so. They had bombed Podgorica 74 times. After Warsaw, Podgorica was the most affected by the bombing city in the Second World War. The present authorities of Montenegro for the last 25 years are pursuing a pro-Western policy of separation of Montenegro from Serbia. They have created a new artificial ethnic group of the so-called Montenegrino, with its separate language that has never existed before. But all Montenegrins have always made an organic part of the Serbian people.
Crnogorci su
Montenegrins are Serbians, true Serbians. We are one people with one language. It resembles the Kievan Rus, when the great Knyaz Vladimir has baptized all the Russians. And now they say to us that Ukrainians are completely different people. The joint history of Serbia and Montenegro didn't avoid intervention of the West, and we now see the results: expansion of the Latin alphabet, propaganda to enter NATO. As if up to now the West hasn't promised us material paradise and the land of milk and honey. But we see the results. All their promises are just beautifully packaged lies. People of Montenegro are Serbians, thus it has always been. Today there are some people who want to be called Montenegrins. It is their right, but you should know, during the time of the King Nicola of Montenegro, there had been no Montenegrins, all considered themselves as Serbs. And according to the new census, there are 40% of Montenegrins, 30% of Serbs, 20% Muslims, 5% of Catholics and 5% of Albanians. I believe that everybody has the right to call himself as he wants. But the biggest problem is that it is difficult to be a Serb in Montenegro today. The West, in every possible way, supports the project of creation of a new people of Montenegrins. In 2006, Milo Djukanovic has arranged a doubtful referendum. With a slight majority, an independence of Montenegro from the joint state with Serbia has been declared. Djukanovic is a person who isn't ashamed to betray all and everyone if it is favorable to him. For example, before a referendum of 2006, support of Moscow was very important to him. So he has been sending very positive signals to Moscow at that time. Djukanovic has used all this to his advantage, but after the referendum he has acted in a completely different way. Now he relies on the opposite centers of power, hoping that it would benefit him and his family. The authorities have been presenting to Russia a favorable picture, that Montenegro is an Orthodox country which is friendly to Russia and is attractive to investments. But the real policy has been conducted in an absolute different direction. The government of Montenegro has introduced euro currency without being a member of the European Union, and also has carried out gay parades despite protests of most of the country's population. The most scandalous step of that policy is the creation by Djukanovic of the so-called Montenegrin Orthodox Church. It is basically a sect, a product of the political engineering. They have found several former priests. They have nothing in common with the real church, have nothing in common with Orthodoxy. We were in Albania recently, and there I've heard from the Albanian Prime Minister Rama, Albanism is our religion. Here this sect is guided by the same slogan, Chernogorstvo is our religion. And look, in Russia there is so-called Ukrainian patriarchate, and misfortunate this Denisenko Filaret. Look at what they're doing. Well, how it isn't shame of him. I know this person who had been a candidate to be elected the Moscow Patriarch, and apparently because he wasn't chosen, he got so angry and hateful. Instead of uniting, he separates. And he even went to America and asked for weapons. Only an atheist can do so. Now he's treating his people worse than an atheist, this Denisenko miserable. What is noteworthy, the so-called Montenegrin Orthodox Church has been recognized by no one except for the similar unrecognized breakaway so-called Ukrainian Orthodox Church. And the unity of Russians and Serbs was proven once again. The enemy uses similar methods against both of their churches. Of course, it cannot be a good idea, we don't recognize it. It isn't recognized by the ecumenical patriarchate, it isn't recognized by anybody. As they created the independent state, now they try to create their own church. Let them call themselves as they want, but they have no right to take away the Serbian churches and temples. In 2015, Milo Djukanovic's government has voted to officially recognize the pseudo-state of Kosovo as the full member of UNESCO. It causes indignation of all Orthodox patriots. Kosovo is the spiritual center of the Serbian people. There are no doubts about it. It has always belonged to Serbia. Later, Albanians have been placed there, and gradually they became the majority. But Kosovo was, is, and will always be the spiritual center of the Serbian people until the end of the world. Nobody can cancel or destroy our history in Kosovo. It lasts already for thousands of years. It is visible in our monasteries, and it's not important that today this territory is something else. Milo Djukanovic's government supports official recognition of the pseudo-state of Kosovo. Until now, the West didn't manage to pass this decision through structures of the UN.
Cuba?
No.
Espagne?
No.
France?
Oui.
Fédération de Russie?
Нет.
Mexique?
No, en contra.
Montenegro?
Yes.
Serbie?
No.
Ladies and gentlemen, the General Conference has thus voted against request for the admission of the Republic of Kosovo to UNESCO. And that's now the decision of this General Conference.
Many countries, including Serbia and Russia, voted against, but such attempts will obviously repeat in the future. Djukanovic can afford to be a traitor as well as he was in 1999. Then NATO bombed our country, and at that time he was the member of the army leadership and came over to the side of the enemy. He can destroy Yugoslavia, the joint state of Serbia and Montenegro. He can recognize the pseudo-state of Kosovo, and now he can support the accession to UNESCO of this pseudo-state. And he can afford this because he doesn't have to worry that he will be punished by the voters at the time when elections come. Citizens of Montenegro, in their majority, are against of such actions. But Djukanovic is sure that he will do the same as always during elections. He uses the possibilities he has as the head of the government of Montenegro for personal enrichment of his relatives and close friends, people from the criminal world which help him to falsify the results of elections. In Montenegro, there are various mechanisms of theft of election results. Not only the state funds and government institutions participate in it, but also organized crime. They use the cruel violence, pressure, thefts of ballots on point of vote, bribery of members of election commission, change of electoral registers. In Montenegro, all these disturbing undemocratic tendencies have been accumulating for many years until they have grown into an open opposition of the people and the authorities in the fall of 2015. The country found itself on a crossroads, whether to be with Russia with its Orthodox identity and tradition, or with the West, gay parades and illusory material well-being. It is surprising that the government wants to make such an important decision behind the backs of the people, without bringing this major question to a public debate and a referendum. In general, everywhere in the world, referendums are held on such questions, and people have to express their will. It shouldn't be that someone else makes the decisions for them. The desired or unwillingness to enter NATO has to be a result of a free choice. We have to go to Europe because we are part of Europe. We have to go to the European values. But we shouldn't lose our national identity. If we lose it, why we need the EU? We have no right to lose ourselves. I'm against the accession to the European Union if a condition of it is the loss of our identity. I'm for Europe only if we enter it with our name and surname. Today at 7 o'clock, on the square of the Republic, the protest against the entry of Montenegro into NATO will take place. And it isn't surprising, just 15 years ago, planes of NATO have bombed this country. People were killed here. Today, the government of this country violently guides the population into NATO, ignoring the will of 70% of Montenegrins who oppose it. It is not for the first time that the Serbian people are on a historical crossroads and face a civilizational and existential choice. The similar situation has also been in 1389, before the decisive Battle of Kosovo. God had offered to Prince Lazar two possible alternatives of the future for the Serbian people, either a terrestrial kingdom or the kingdom of heaven. Back then, the choice was made in favor of the kingdom of heaven, and thousands of Serbian saints have filled the heavens, and the soul of the people remained alive. But the terrestrial kingdom was lost for long 500 years of a cruel Ottoman yoke. It is perfectly described in folk songs and the epos of the Serbian people, and also in the remarkable book of St. Nicholas the Serbian, Carov Zavet. It greatly surpasses by its spiritual depth and poetry a much better known Bhagavad Gita. Probably the main reason for this inadequacy is that the dominant progressive mass culture and mass media are by all means advancing everything pagan and occult, while diminishing everything orthodox and true. That historical choice on the Kosovo battlefield probably explains a surprising phenomenon of a spiritual brotherhood and deep friendship of the Russian and Serbian peoples. Serbs preferred the kingdom of heaven over material well-being. Russians too have sought to construct a holy Russia, the successor of Byzantium and the Third Rome. The sanctity, justice, and the truth were always a priority. We can recall the well-known words of the Saint Prince Alexander Nevsky: God is not in the force, but in the truth. And the name and dates of decisive fights of Russians and Serbs wonderfully coincide. Kos in Serbian means kulik in Russian, which is a type of a little bird known as a sandpiper in English. Kosovo battle took place in 1389, and a famous Kulikovo battle between the Russians and Mongol Tatars occurred only 9 years earlier in 1380. Our history confirms that we have no closer people than Russians, both spiritually and culturally, since the great Tsars and up to our time. I hope and I wish that so it remains in the future. If there was no Russia and Russian-Turkish wars, there would be neither Serbia nor Greece or Montenegro. Those who know history understand that without the Russian-Turkish war, there wouldn't be Serbian revolt of 1804 and 1813 as well. We are grateful for this help. Montenegro has defined its way long time ago. We aspire to a military neutrality which would be guaranteed by Russia and other large military powers. But for us, as the party of the Serbian people in Montenegro, Russia would be the most important guarantor. I will refer to St. Peter Cetinski, and I will repeat his words which he has said to his successor Peter II Petrovich Negoš. Believe in God and stick to Russia. For the sake of liberation of the Serbian brothers, Russia has waged numerous wars with Muslim Turkey. In order to protect Serbia, Russia has also entered into the First World War. Montenegro, in turn, has declared war on Japan in 1905 in solidarity with Russia, and it even has sent its soldiers over many thousand kilometers to the Far East. All this is well remembered in Serbia and Montenegro. The historical memory of the people is well kept by the Orthodox Church. Therefore, there is hope, and we have good reasons to believe that the wrong course of the present leadership will be changed soon, and Montenegro will return to itself, the Orthodox beautiful country, and its happiness and prosperity will be constructed together with brotherly Serbia and Russia, and the people of this highland country will live according to their identity and tradition.